You didn't raise your voice. You didn't beg. You didn't chase. You simply showed up as yourself. And somehow that changed him. Not because you tried to, not because you planned to, but because authenticity has a way of touching places that ego can't protect. Now he's stuck, not in love exactly, not in regret openly, but in something far more uncomfortable. Awareness. This is the story of how you changed him without trying and why he can't move on. You didn't walk into his life announcing that you were there to change anything. You didn't arrive with lessons prepared or demands written out. You simply existed the way you always had, present, grounded, paying attention in a world that rushes past itself. And that was enough, because most people don't actually meet themselves in their lifetime. They live through habits, defenses, reflexes built years ago, often in pain they never healed. Then someone like you appears, not trying to fix them, not trying to control them, just being real. And suddenly, they see something unfamiliar looking back at them from the mirror you never meant to hold up. Before you, his life moved on autopilot. He reacted instead of reflected. When something felt uncomfortable, he avoided it. When emotions got heavy, he distracted himself. That's not because he was weak. It's because no one ever slowed down long enough around him to make stillness feel safe. Stillness can be terrifying when you're not used to it. It forces you to hear your own thoughts. It forces you to feel what you've been postponing. Most people fill their days with noise for that exact reason. And then you came along, comfortable in silence, unafraid of pauses, listening not just to his words but to what sat underneath them. You didn't interrogate him. You didn't analyze him out loud. You just noticed things. The way his tone changed when he talked about certain memories. The way his shoulders dropped when he felt understood. The way he softened when he realized he didn't have to perform. Around you, he didn't need to be impressive. He didn't need to be invincible. And that's when something unfamiliar happened. He felt himself relax into a version of himself he had never spent time with before. Not the guarded one. Not the distracted one. But the honest one. Psychologists talk about something called emotional mirroring. When someone sits with you calmly, without judgment, your nervous system starts to regulate itself in response. Your breathing slows. Your defenses lower. Your mind becomes clearer. You didn't know you were doing that. You weren't trained for it. You weren't trying to be anyone's safe space. You just were. And in that space, he started noticing his own patterns. He started hearing his own contradictions. He started recognizing emotions he usually buried under humor, ambition, or distance. For the first time, he saw how quickly he shut down when things got serious. He noticed how often he avoided accountability by changing the subject. He realized how rarely he asked himself what he actually felt instead of what he thought he should feel. And the strange part is this: you never pointed it out. That realization was his alone. That's why it hit so hard. Growth forced on someone creates resistance. Growth discovered internally creates transformation. You gave him the conditions for discovery. There's a difference between being told who you are and realizing who you've been pretending not to be. With you, he couldn't hide behind charm or silence. Not because you challenged him aggressively, but because your presence was consistent. You showed up the same way every time. Calm, honest, steady. Consistency is rare, and when someone encounters it, it exposes all the inconsistency within themselves. He started asking questions he had avoided for years. Why do I pull away when things feel real? Why do I sabotage what feels stable? Why do I confuse intensity with connection? Real life studies on emotional intelligence show that people develop self-awareness faster when they're around individuals who model emotional regulation rather than emotional reaction. You didn't react dramatically when things went wrong. You responded thoughtfully. You took time before speaking. You chose words carefully. That alone made him slow down. When someone slows down around you, you either grow with them or you feel exposed. He felt both. Around you, he experienced moments of clarity that didn't exist before, conversations that didn't feel like battles, disagreements that didn't feel like threats, silence that didn't feel like abandonment. That was new territory, and new territory is uncomfortable when you've built your identity around survival instead of awareness. He began to see how much of his personality was built as armor, how many of his habits were responses to old wounds rather than current reality. And here's the part that stays with him now. That version of himself only existed when you were there. Not because you created it, but because you allowed it. You didn't rescue him from himself. You didn't guide him step by step. You simply didn't interfere with his process. You gave him space to hear his own truth. And once someone hears that truth, they can't unhear it, even if they try. After you left, he tried to go back to who he was before, tried to return to distraction, to noise, to familiarity. But it didn't work, because once awareness enters the room, ignorance can't sit comfortably anymore. He noticed his impatience more. He noticed how shallow certain interactions felt. He noticed how quickly he got bored with conversations that lacked depth. The same behaviors that once kept him comfortable now felt empty. He met new people. He smiled. He laughed. But something was missing. Not excitement, not attraction, presence. With them, he was performing again. And he knew it. That's the curse of growth you don't ask for. Once you've met yourself, pretending becomes exhausting. You didn't ruin his peace. You disrupted his illusion. And there's a difference. Think about how many people go their entire lives never slowing down enough to notice who they really are. They get praised for being productive, charming, successful, but no one ever asks them if they're aligned. You did, without asking a single question. Your way of being asked it for you. And that's why he can't just replace you. Because he's not looking for another person. He's looking for access to that version of himself again. He remembers moments that seemed small at the time, sitting quietly without needing to fill the space, talking about fears without being judged, admitting uncertainty without feeling less valuable. Those moments rewired something in him. Neuroscience backs this up. Repeated experiences of emotional safety create new neural pathways. The brain learns that vulnerability doesn't always lead to pain. But when that environment disappears, the brain keeps searching for it. And here's the truth he's struggling with. He can't go back, and he doesn't yet know how to move forward. Because moving forward would require effort, accountability, growth. And staying where he is hurts less in the short term. Missing you is easier than becoming who he saw himself capable of being with you. You didn't demand change. You didn't ask for promises. You didn't say, be better. You simply lived in alignment with yourself. And alignment is contagious or threatening. Depending on how ready someone is, he wasn't ready enough to hold on to it. But he was ready enough to see it, and seeing it changed everything. Now, when he reflects, often late at night, when distractions fade, he realizes something uncomfortable. The peace he felt wasn't because life was perfect. It was because he wasn't fighting himself. With you, he didn't need to. And now, without you, that internal conflict is louder than ever. You didn't make him incomplete. You made him aware of what wholeness felt like. That's why he feels stuck. Not because he lost you, but because he met himself and doesn't know how to live with that knowledge yet. You were never meant to carry that responsibility. You were never meant to stay and guide him through it. Some people come into our lives not to stay, but to introduce us to a truth we can't ignore afterward. You showed him a version of himself that was calmer, more honest, more present. A version that didn't need constant validation or distraction. And now that he knows that version exists, he can't pretend it doesn't. That awareness follows him into every room, every relationship, every quiet moment. And whether he chooses to grow into it or run from it, that part is no longer yours to hold. You didn't change him by trying, you changed him by being. And that kind of change doesn't fade, it lingers. It waits. It asks questions when the world gets quiet. And once those questions begin, there is no real way back to who he was before he met you. You didn't love him the way the world told you to. You didn't try to bend into a shape that would make him comfortable. You didn't hide pieces of yourself to fit into his expectations. You loved fully, honestly, and openly, but you never sacrificed your own boundaries, your own essence, your own sense of who you are. And that confused him. It startled him. Because most people are used to relationships built on compromise that erases the self, on love that demands performance, on giving that asks for surrender. He had never met someone who could give so much without losing themselves in the process. You weren't possessive. You didn't seek to control him. You didn't bend to soothe insecurities or to silence doubts. You simply loved him while standing firm in your own truth. And that presence of someone who could hold both love and self-respect at the same time, that is rare. It is something people aren't prepared for. Most people fall in love with love itself, not with the person they are sharing it with. They mistake need for affection, dependency for devotion, And they never learn the difference until they meet someone like you. He had been with people who tolerated him, who gave him affection, but only when it was convenient, who demanded compromise disguised as compromise. He had been with people who told him what he wanted to hear rather than what he needed to hear. He had been with people who expected him to lead while they followed quietly, suppressing themselves to maintain the relationship. But with you, the rules didn't apply. You were present. You were expressive. You were firm. You were honest. You didn't erase your boundaries to make him comfortable. You didn't soften your light to make him feel brighter. You were full, vibrant, and unwavering, and that shook him. There's a subtle power in loving someone without being consumed by them. It's quiet, but it is transformative. It doesn't announce itself loudly with drama or demands. It doesn't force change with ultimatums or pressure. Instead, it quietly illuminates gaps, inconsistencies, and weaknesses that have long been ignored. And when someone has been living in self-deception or avoidance, seeing this kind of love for the first time is like stepping into sunlight after a lifetime in shadows. He didn't know how to process it. He was comfortable with love that came with chains, and now he was faced with freedom. He didn't even realize that freedom could be uncomfortable, because your love didn't diminish your presence. You didn't shrink to accommodate his insecurities. You didn't hide your opinions to avoid conflict. You didn't compromise your peace for the sake of appearances. You loved with honesty, and honesty has a way of exposing truth that people aren't always ready to face. He started noticing things about himself, how he reacted when someone challenged him with compassion, how he responded when someone held firm to their principles, how he felt when someone could say no without resentment. You didn't teach him. You simply existed, and in your existence, he met himself. It's hard to articulate the way that can hit a person. It's unsettling to be around someone who loves deeply, but doesn't lose themselves. It's unsettling because it forces a confrontation with the truth about what he had been accepting from others and what he had been giving himself. Most people never consider that love can coexist with self-respect. They confuse love with compromise, devotion with submission, affection with dependency. And when he realized that you embodied the balance he had never witnessed, he couldn't figure out how to respond. He didn't know whether to admire it, fear it, or run from it. You didn't apologize for your strength. You didn't dilute your feelings to make him comfortable. You didn't manipulate or negotiate the terms of affection. You gave fully, with integrity, without erasing your presence or minimizing your needs. That's a strange thing for someone who has only known love that asks for everything and gives nothing back. It is unsettling to encounter someone who can offer everything without losing themselves, because it mirrors the areas where they have failed themselves, the moments where they have compromised too much, the parts of their own identity they have set aside for convenience or fear. And in that discomfort, confusion arises. He couldn't categorize your love. It didn't fit into the familiar patterns he knew. It didn't demand submission. It didn't come with hidden agendas. It didn't require him to prove his worth through performance. He wanted control. He wanted predictability. He wanted someone to love him in the ways he expected to be loved. But you didn't conform. You didn't adjust. You didn't negotiate your essence to suit his comfort zone. You stayed whole. You stayed yourself. There's a psychological principle here. Humans are wired to feel safe in predictability. When a relationship is structured in a way that aligns with old expectations, even if it's imperfect or damaging, it feels familiar and therefore secure. But when someone brings a different model, someone who loves intensely without losing integrity, it creates cognitive dissonance. It forces him to confront the ways he has compromised his own authenticity. It forces him to reflect on whether he has been living in relationships that demanded he shrink. And that confrontation is often terrifying. You were a mirror he didn't ask for, but he desperately needed. You reflected back to him what true balance looks like, the ability to care without dependence, to commit without surrendering, to love without erasing oneself. And that reflection was disorienting because he had never seen it in action. He had only imagined it, or perhaps doubted it existed. And now, facing it in real life, he didn't know how to respond. It challenged the assumptions he had made about love, about intimacy, and about himself. You didn't save him. You didn't rescue him. You didn't instruct him. You didn't fix him. You simply held your ground in your own life, while loving him fully. That's enough to change someone profoundly. People underestimate the power of being complete in your own presence. It draws others in, it inspires self-reflection, and it awakens awareness. And that awakening is not always comfortable. It can feel like an unraveling of everything someone thought they understood about love and connection. In your love, he found not chaos, not obsession, not dependency, but clarity. He found a presence that was steady even in uncertainty, a commitment that was unwavering even without guarantees, a connection that was deep even without control. He couldn't rationalize it. He couldn't explain it. He couldn't contain it. That confusion, that awe, that discomfort, that's where transformation begins. And it begins because you loved without losing yourself. And now, every encounter, every attempt at intimacy, every new relationship reminds him of you. Not because he necessarily wants to return, but because he measures every experience against the standard you unconsciously set. You demonstrated that love doesn't require surrender. That affection doesn't demand compliance. That devotion doesn't erase individuality. And once someone has witnessed that balance, it becomes impossible to settle for anything less. You weren't trying to teach him. You weren't trying to change him. You weren't trying to impress him. You were simply yourself. But in being yourself fully, you challenged him in ways no one else could. You revealed the possibilities of what he could have, what he could become, what relationships could feel like when love is mutual, whole, and honest. And he struggles with that, not because he failed to appreciate it, but because he has never been asked to meet love on those terms before. You didn't demand respect, you embodied it. You didn't demand loyalty, you lived it. You didn't demand understanding, you showed it. That presence is unforgettable. It leaves marks not because of dramatic gestures, but because of the quiet power of someone who remains complete in themselves while giving wholly to another. And that is why he is confused. He didn't know that love could exist this way. He didn't know that someone could be this present, this strong, this unwavering, and still love him fully. And when someone realizes they have been missing this, they are left to grapple with their own inadequacies, their own expectations, and their own choices. You showed him that love does not require the sacrifice of self, that being whole is not incompatible with giving, with connection, with intimacy. That is a truth many people spend a lifetime searching for. And you gave it to him without forcing, without demanding, without even intending to teach. And that, in its own way, is both a gift and a challenge, a revelation that changes someone from the inside out. Because the hardest lesson is not learning to love someone else. The hardest lesson is learning to love fully while remaining yourself. You did it effortlessly. And that was the moment he realized he had never truly known love before meeting you. You didn't make a scene. You didn't yell or accuse. You didn't cling. You didn't beg. You simply walked away, quietly, steadily, without announcing your departure to the world or even explaining it fully to him. And in that quiet act, you left something far heavier than absence. You left questions. You left echoes in places he hadn't noticed needed answering. You left a silence that speaks louder than any argument, louder than any confession, louder than any attempt to explain feelings that can't be forced into words. Walking away with dignity is not about proving anything to anyone. It is about showing yourself that your value is not negotiable, that your peace is not disposable, that your love is not contingent on performance or acceptance. And for him, that dignity was a shock. He was expecting chaos, drama, confrontation. He was expecting explanations, tears, pleas, maybe even anger. He was expecting you to crumble in ways that would make him feel in control again. But you didn't crumble. You didn't perform. You simply stepped aside, and that left him with nothing to hold onto except himself and the reflection of what he could have had. Walking away with dignity is powerful because it refuses to validate the patterns that trap people in relationships where they are not ready to grow. It refuses to reward excuses, to excuse manipulations, to tolerate disrespect. When you walk away with calm strength, you force someone to face their own choices. You force them to confront the ways they have failed, the ways they have taken for granted, the ways they have measured love against convenience rather than authenticity. And the strange thing is, this confrontation is silent. It doesn't shout, it doesn't accuse, but it doesn't allow escape either. He finds himself replaying moments, words, decisions, gestures, all while realizing that none of it can be undone. He finds himself asking, Why did she leave? What did I miss? Could I have done more? Did I even deserve her? And these questions are heavier than any punishment because they come from within, from the places he cannot ignore. You didn't leave to punish him. You didn't leave to make him suffer or to make him understand. You left because you understood yourself. You left because you realized that remaining in a situation where respect, honesty, and presence were not mutual would cost you more than separation ever could. And that is a kind of wisdom that is rare. Most people leave relationships out of frustration, desperation, or anger. Most people run from discomfort or conflict. But when you leave with dignity, you do so with awareness. You do so with self-respect. You do so with the quiet knowledge that your integrity matters more than temporary connection, that your peace is worth more than clinging to someone who cannot meet you fully. He struggles with that. He struggles because your departure did not come with justification or explanation that could be argued against. He struggles because your dignity was not something he could dismantle with excuses or manipulation. He struggles because the void you left is not something that can be filled with distractions or distractions of his own making. He can meet other people, smile at them, talk to them, engage with them, but none of it carries the same weight, the same clarity, the same absence that your exit left behind. He is left with questions that do not have immediate answers, questions that force him to reflect, and reflection is something he had avoided when you were present. There is a lesson in leaving with dignity, one that most people resist. Sometimes the most powerful act of love, both for yourself and for someone else, is not in staying. It is in leaving. Not leaving with bitterness, not leaving with anger, not leaving to prove a point, but leaving with a sense of self that cannot be compromised. You walked away, but in doing so, you did not sever entirely. You created space for him to see, to feel, to question. Space that he had not earned through action, but space that your presence and your absence demanded anyway. And in that space, he confronts himself in ways he never could have while you were there, because while you were present, he could distract himself with the comfort of your being. But when you are gone, the mirror appears in the empty spaces you leave, and he cannot look away. He asks himself, without knowing how to answer, what he took for granted. He thinks about the way he ignored little things, the way he dismissed what mattered, the way he believed love could be demanded rather than earned through presence. He recalls conversations where he thought he was listening but wasn't, gestures he thought he had appreciated but didn't, moments he assumed would always be there but are gone forever. And every memory becomes a question. What did I lose? What did I fail to recognize? Why didn't I see what was happening until it was too late? Those questions are not easy to answer because they are not about blame. They are about awareness. They are about the truth that some things, once gone, cannot return to their original state. When you walk away with dignity, you teach a lesson in impermanence. You show that love is not ownership, that connection is not possession, that presence is not guaranteed. And this lesson is not delivered through confrontation or speech. It is delivered in quiet absence, in the echo of what could have been, in the space left for reflection and understanding. He may not realize it immediately. He may resist it. He may even try to fill the void with distractions, with other people, with things that give the illusion of normalcy. But deep down, he carries the questions you left behind. They follow him in solitude, in moments when the world is quiet, when his mind is still, when he cannot avoid himself. And in those moments, the weight of your departure becomes undeniable. You left without bitterness. You left without malice. You left without explanation that could be argued with or diminished. You left because you understood that your peace is sacred and that sometimes the highest form of care for someone else is to allow them to face themselves without your constant intervention. And that is why he cannot move on easily. He cannot replace what you gave simply by replacing your presence. He cannot replicate the integrity, the clarity, the calm strength, the self-respect you embodied. He cannot answer the questions you left behind because they are not questions about you. They are questions about him. And those questions force him to confront truths he had ignored, truths about his own limitations, his own choices, his own capacity for growth. Walking away with dignity is a reflection of self-worth. It is the understanding that love is not a cage, that respect is not optional, and that personal boundaries are not negotiable. You demonstrated that to him simply by existing and by choosing yourself in a moment when it mattered most. That kind of choice is rare, and it leaves an impact that lingers far beyond the visible moment of departure. People rarely forget what it feels like to encounter someone who values themselves so highly that they cannot be compromised even in love. It is unsettling, it is challenging, and it is unforgettable. He remembers the moments that led up to your departure, not as dramatic confrontations, but as quiet affirmations of your integrity. He remembers the way you held yourself in conversation, the way you spoke with care, without sacrificing honesty, the way you stood by your truth without aggression. He remembers the subtle power of your presence and the even greater power of your absence. And those memories become questions that do not fade. They are reminders of a standard he has never been able to meet, of a reality he cannot reclaim, and of a person he cannot replace. You didn't leave because he failed to deserve love. You didn't leave because he was broken or incapable. You left because you understood the value of your own life, the importance of your own boundaries, and the power of walking with integrity. And that is a lesson he cannot ignore. It is a lesson that echoes in empty rooms, in quiet moments, in reflective thoughts that come unbidden. You left, and in doing so, you transformed his world not with anger or confrontation, but with dignity and the questions that linger in the spaces you vacated. He carries those questions now, whether he wants to or not. He wrestles with them, consciously or unconsciously. He remembers the person you were, the love you offered, the boundaries you maintained, and the clarity you embodied. And in the quiet of his own reflection, he realizes that some things, once experienced, cannot be unexperienced. Your departure was not the end. It was a catalyst, it was a mirror, it was an awakening. And that is the power of walking away with dignity and leaving questions behind. He thought he knew what connection felt like. He thought love was about fireworks, the rush of adrenaline, the quickened heartbeat that comes from uncertainty, drama, and tension. That's what he had been chasing all along, moments that burned fast, left scars, and faded quickly. And then he met you. And with you, there were no explosions, no chaos, no frantic attempts to impress or perform. There was just presence. There was calm. There was safety. And that safety felt strange at first. He didn't know what to do with it. He wasn't prepared for it. Because in a world where intensity is celebrated and emotion is often mistaken for love, safety can feel unfamiliar, almost boring. But that familiarity, that quiet steadiness, that absence of theatricality was exactly what he needed. And he didn't realize it until it was gone. You weren't flashy. You didn't try to dazzle him with dramatics or sudden grand gestures. You didn't test him, manipulate him, or challenge him for the sake of excitement. You didn't create uncertainty as if it were a game. You simply existed in a way that made him feel grounded, seen, and accepted without strings attached. You offered a presence that was unwavering, predictable in the best sense, not predictable as in dull, but predictable as in trustworthy, safe, and real. That kind of emotional safety is rare. Most people are surrounded by turbulence disguised as passion. They are accustomed to chaos because it feels alive, because it creates attention, because it masks their insecurities. And then you come along, calm, steady, and fully yourself, and suddenly the world feels slower, quieter, but infinitely more honest. He didn't immediately understand it. He mistook it at first for routine or indifference, because he had been conditioned to equate excitement with value. He had been taught to crave the rush, to expect tension, to measure connection in peaks of emotion rather than depth of presence. But slowly, subtly, the reality of what you offered seeped in. He noticed that with you, there was no pretending. There were no performances to keep him entertained. He could breathe. He could speak without fear of judgment. He could be imperfect, messy, uncertain, without feeling small or unsafe. That kind of permission is transformative, but it is also quietly destabilizing when someone has been chasing drama as proof of love. Your safety didn't demand his submission. It didn't require him to prove himself constantly. It didn't measure affection in attention or approval. You gave him space to exist as he was, while still holding yourself with integrity. And that balance, freedom without neglect, care without pressure, love without performance, is rare. It's disorienting for someone used to transactional relationships, because it forces reflection. He began to see patterns he hadn't noticed before. The way he had sought excitement over substance, The way he had chased intensity while avoiding intimacy. The way he had measured connection by the highs rather than the calm, steady presence that truly sustains it. And that reflection was uncomfortable, because growth is always uncomfortable when it catches you unprepared. The truth is, safety is underrated in human relationships. Neuroscience and psychological studies show that human brains are wired to respond to consistent, predictable, and trustworthy presence with a sense of calm that allows real connection to form. When people experience safety in relationships, their stress levels decrease, their capacity for empathy increases, and their ability to think clearly improves. You didn't need to cite research or explain concepts. You just existed that way. And he absorbed it. Slowly, unknowingly, he felt it, but he didn't name it. He didn't appreciate it fully because it was quiet, subtle, lacking the spectacle he had been chasing. It didn't scream, it didn't demand, it didn't overwhelm, but it healed, and that is far more powerful than excitement. And when it ended, when your presence and that quiet assurance were no longer there, he realized the magnitude of what he had lost. He had been chasing thrills, flashes, and highs, and in doing so, he had taken for granted the one thing that truly matters: stability, trust, presence, and the rare ability to feel safe without conditions. He tried to fill the emptiness left by your absence with the same chaos he had always sought. He looked for excitement, drama, distractions. But none of it replaced what you had given him effortlessly. None of it provided the grounding he had experienced simply by being around you. That is the paradox of safety. It is invisible until it disappears, and when it disappears, its absence is undeniable. He began to notice it in small ways. The way he felt calm just talking to you, without pretending or performing. The way he could share thoughts that seemed trivial or fears that seemed insignificant, and you received them without judgment. The way he could rest in your presence and feel understood without the need for proof or reassurance. He realized, bit by bit, that he had been mistaking excitement for love, and that what he had truly experienced with you was far rarer, far more sustaining, and far more valuable. And it was gone. You didn't leave with noise or chaos. You left by simply being true to yourself, by ending what no longer aligned with integrity and presence. And in that absence, he faced a truth he hadn't fully grasped while you were there. He had lost safety. He had lost the rarest kind of connection, the kind that nurtures growth, encourages honesty, and allows love to flourish without fear. Safety in relationships is more powerful than passion. It allows vulnerability. It allows authenticity. It allows a person to meet their own emotions without fear. And you gave him that, but he didn't fully recognize it until you were gone. He saw now that every flash of drama or thrill he had chased with others could not replace the peace and clarity he had felt with you. He saw that excitement could never teach the same lessons, could never hold him accountable, could never mirror him in the quiet, reflective ways that you did. You represented something profound, something fundamental, something that could not be replaced with loud gestures or fleeting thrills. And now that realization hit him too late. The irony is cruel but not unjust. He had been searching for love in ways that always distracted him from its true form, and when he finally encountered it in you, he didn't recognize it fully until absence made it undeniable. He can look back at memories, replay conversations, analyze your words, but he cannot replicate what safety felt like, because safety is not something that can be manufactured. It is cultivated through presence, integrity, and consistency, all things you embodied naturally, all things he took for granted until they were gone. And now, he is left with questions, reflections, and a longing he cannot satisfy through anything familiar or fleeting. You represented constancy without dullness, calm without stagnation, care without dependence, and love without compromise. You gave him a rare gift, one he did not understand fully, until he tried to replace it and failed. That is the weight of your presence, quiet, grounding, unforgettable. And that is why, even now, he carries the memory of what you offered, the understanding of what he lost, and the ache of realizing that safety, once given freely and cherished fully, cannot be reconstructed with anyone else. He now understands that excitement is temporary. It thrills, it entices, it distracts, but it cannot sustain a heart, it cannot hold a soul, and it cannot build the kind of connection that lasts. You showed him that love is not in the peaks, but in the steady, safe valleys. And once you leave, the absence of that security becomes the loudest echo in every other relationship. He sees now that safety is not boring, that stability is not suffocating, and that calm presence is far more valuable than drama. And he realizes too late that you were never going to be replaced because no one else can offer the quiet assurance, the unwavering acceptance, and the trust that you embodied effortlessly. He didn't notice at first. He thought what he felt was temporary, fleeting, a spark that would fade like any other. But over time, the realization grew quietly in the spaces he tried to ignore. You became the measure against which everything else was judged. Not through words, not through grand gestures, not through forcing him to see or understand. You became the standard simply by being yourself, fully, consistently, and without compromise. You showed what love could feel like when it was grounded in honesty, presence, and integrity, and once someone experiences that, it cannot be erased. Standards, once set, don't fade. And that is the weight of what you offered. He had been accustomed to compromise, to settling, to tolerating less than he deserved. He thought he knew what connection was supposed to feel like. He thought passion was enough, intensity was enough, dramatic gestures were enough. But then he was with you, and nothing felt the same. You didn't just exist in a way that made him comfortable. You existed in a way that demanded attention, reflection, and respect. And in that, you taught him something he had never learned before: the value of consistency, the power of presence, the beauty of someone who gives fully without asking for anything in return. You weren't trying to show him the difference, but he saw it anyway. And when he saw it, he realized he had never known the standard that truly mattered. You became the reference point he couldn't forget. Every smile after you, every conversation, every touch, every attempt at connection was measured unconsciously against you. He found himself comparing, wondering why other experiences felt hollow, why excitement without safety felt shallow, why passion without presence left him restless. He could not articulate it at first, but inside, he knew something essential had been lost. You had shown him that love could be both tender and strong, calm and exhilarating, generous yet grounded. And that combination, once witnessed, sets a standard that ordinary experiences cannot meet. It is difficult for someone to realize that they have been measured, not in judgment, not in accusation, but in presence. You didn't critique him or scold him. You didn't make lists of failures or point out flaws. You simply were yourself, whole and unwavering, and in doing so, you made him aware of his own limitations, his own compromises, and his own failures to measure up. People rarely notice what it means to encounter someone who does not demand, does not manipulate, and does not compromise themselves for approval. You gave him that experience effortlessly, and that is why it has left such an indelible mark. Once a standard is set, it reshapes perception. Every interaction afterward is colored by the memory of what has already been experienced. He finds himself restless in situations that would have satisfied him before. He feels incomplete in connections that used to feel sufficient. He searches for a sense of integrity, authenticity, and understanding that now seems elusive. That is the power of a standard. It is both a mirror and a challenge. He sees the reflection of what is possible, and the challenge is that he has nothing to compare it to except what you offered. And what you offered was rare. What you offered was real. What you offered cannot be duplicated. You taught him, without saying a word, that love is not about performance. You taught him that devotion is not about control. You taught him that connection is not about chaos, excitement, or compromise. You taught him that someone could be wholly themselves while giving wholly to another, and that integrity in love is not optional. He carries these lessons now, whether he wants to or not. They are embedded in his consciousness. Every relationship, every attempt at intimacy, every moment of closeness is filtered through the memory of you. And it is unsettling because he realizes that what he is seeking in others has already been offered once, and that it cannot simply be replicated. He thought he could move forward, thought he could forget, thought he could replace you with another experience that would fill the gaps you left. But no matter how hard he tries, the standard you set remains. He may find excitement, companionship, fleeting comfort, but he will not find the quiet assurance, the unwavering presence, the consistent integrity, or the depth of care you embodied. Standards do not fade because they are not based on spectacle or superficiality. They are rooted in the essence of who someone is and how they show up in the world. And that is what you gave him, a glimpse of a rare, authentic existence that remains etched in his memory. Every memory he recalls is tied to that standard. The way you listened without judgment, the way you spoke without manipulation, the way you loved without compromise, the way you held space for him and for yourself simultaneously. That is not something people easily forget. It is not something that can be replaced with effort, distraction, or substitution. Once experienced, it redefines expectations, reshapes desires, and forces reflection. And that is precisely why he struggles. He can no longer settle for less, even if he tries to convince himself otherwise. You have set the bar, and it is one that endures. You became the standard not by trying to impress or to dominate, but by living authentically. By showing up fully in every moment without apology, without self-doubt, without compromise. You demonstrated what it means to love with clarity, to care without suffocating, to exist without forcing. And he witnessed it, and now he knows the difference. Every fleeting connection he encounters is measured against the quiet, unwavering example you embodied. That standard, once experienced, cannot be unlearned. It cannot be ignored. It remains as a reference point, as a mirror, as a reminder of what was possible when love and integrity coexist. He may attempt to rationalize, to excuse, to forget. He may distract himself, fill his days, seek new relationships, try to replicate excitement. But none of it replaces the standard you set. It lingers in memory, in comparison, in the moments he cannot escape. He remembers the authenticity of your presence, the steadiness of your care, the freedom you offered to be himself without the usual constraints. That is rare. That is transformative. And it cannot fade because it was not manufactured. It was lived. You became the standard because you loved with wholeness. You showed the power of self, respect intertwined with affection, calm interwoven with passion, generosity balanced with boundaries. He was not ready to fully understand it at the time. He may never articulate it completely, but he feels it, and feelings once imprinted deeply do not fade easily. They shape perception, influence behavior, and leave an enduring mark on the soul. The standard you set is not something external. It is now part of his internal compass, whether he knows it or not, whether he accepts it or resists it. He carries it everywhere, quietly, inescapably. And even as he encounters new people, new relationships, new experiences, he measures them against what you embodied. He compares them unconsciously, sometimes harshly, sometimes wistfully, always inevitably. And that is why he struggles to move on, why he cannot simply forget, why he cannot replace what you were with anyone else. Standards once set do not fade. They linger. They demand reflection. They change perception. And in your life, your presence, your integrity, you became the standard. He may try to fill the void, but the memory of your standard is not something anyone can recreate. He may seek connection, but he cannot escape the benchmark you unconsciously established. He may attempt to replicate excitement or drama elsewhere, but those pale in comparison to the quiet, steady power of what you represented. He may attempt to convince himself that he has moved on, but deep down, he knows that the measure you established endures. It is permanent. It is unforgettable. It is the standard, and standards, once lived and witnessed, do not fade. You didn't change him by force. You changed him by being real in a world full of performance. And if he can't move on, that's not your burden. It's the cost of meeting someone who showed him truth and choosing comfort over courage. Keep walking. Not everyone is meant to grow with you. Some are only meant to be awakened by you. And awakening has consequences.